Welcome back to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, founder and managing director of The Sales Doctor, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the Happiness Concierge. What a name. Isn't that the most delightful name for a business? And it says everything that the business is about. And the Happiness Doctor is actually Rachel Service. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Rachel. Now, she describes herself as work expert, entrepreneur and author, and she's saved companies millions. That's a lot of money by empowering their people and helping them contribute to positive workplace cultures. Rachel's work has been utilised by ASX-listed companies, retail banks, universities and government departments, including the Ministry of Health, Science and Technology Australia, Geoscience Australia, RMIT School of Engineering, AMP and Google. Rachel's award-winning approach to personal and professional growth has been featured in the media, on the TEDx stage and implemented in companies across the globe. I'm delighted to welcome you here today, Rachel.
Great to be here, Ingrid.
So, Rachel, you know that I love the Happiness Concierge name. Tell us a little bit about the journey that led you to creating the Happiness Concierge and what made you choose that name.
Great question. I was working in public relations and I'd booked myself this holiday in New York to go and see Beyonce in concert. And I thought, well, I'm exhausted, but you know what, like Beyonce will really pep me up. And to my surprise, definitely not to my delight, I ended up crying throughout the whole concert. And I suppose you don't, I mean, it was a spiritual experience for sure. But I guess I didn't realize how tired I was. And I also thought, you know, absolutely not. If I'm crying at a Beyonce concert, I can't live with that. It's not okay with my value system. So, cut a long story short, came back to Melbourne where I'm based now. And I wrote down what I wanted to become, what I really wanted. And I wanted to do some form of public speaking. And I said to a friend, well, this is what I want to do. I'm being brave and I'm telling someone. And she goes, great, what do you want to talk about? And I went, oh, I haven't got that far. And she said, well, why don't you talk about your experience with burnout, anxiety, depression? And that was about 9 years ago. And that wasn't really in the zeitgeist or in the corporate parlance. And so unbeknownst to me, there was an audience for that, which led to someone sharing their business card and saying, can you send me your corporate rates? And I thought, oh, corporate rates, I wonder what that is. Oh, okay, ding dong. And that led to me starting the business. And as for the name, I was inspired by these fitness concierges I'd read about in New York, where you could pay someone to knock on your door and say, oi, wake up. Spin classes in half an hour. Here's your headband. Here's your coffee. Here's your, you know, there was no excuse to get out and doing your fitness. And I love the idea of being someone's concierge. My dad's a salesman and my mum's a teacher. So I love the idea of concierge services. Happiness was the guiding star. And yes, it's changed over the years in terms of the product and service offering, which we can talk about if we want. But that was the impetus, supporting people to find what their version of happiness looked like, because it was probably mirroring my own life experience. Yeah.
That's extraordinary. So taking something that was a real pivotal point in your life and then turning that into something that you could then make into a business in order to help everyone else.
By accident and through a lot of perseverance and guesswork and not giving up, yes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the bit that I really loved about it. I mean, I like the word concierge as well, because it really does say that it's a carefully curated service to enable somebody to do something more than what they otherwise would do. And so that's the other thing that attracted me to wanting to have you here and to hear from you. It's such a great word. So, Rachel, they say that culture's the way that people feel about Monday morning on Sunday night. Before we dive into what we can do to create a better culture and its impact on performance, tell us what culture is exactly.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people it can sound like this fluffy thing you do in the well-being team, once a year, and it can be that. But my personal perspective is that a culture is the environment which influences you to behave in a certain way. Now, in a sales-led team, you'll be influenced by KPIs, outcomes, targets, return rates, closing rates, yada, yada, yada. In a government organisation, how you behave is determined by supporting the community you're there to serve. And so the systems, behaviours, communication and relationships dynamics are totally different. But the output is that a culture that is designed either on purpose or for a particular outcome will get that outcome. In reality, most organisations and companies have a culture by accident. And so as a result, if they find their results, whether it's commercial or otherwise, if they're not meeting their intended results, that's when they would look to their culture as a lever to influence everything else.
Okay, I really love that. I'm going to dive into a little bit of what you've sort of pulled apart there, which is absolutely divine around, you know, the different types of influences on particular types of cultures. Is it possible to get a measure of a company's culture?
Yeah, and plenty of companies use engagement surveys, which can be a sort of pulse tool and one-on-ones, to get a sense of how are employees engaged. So just to paint a picture, 38% of Australian workers are considering their other options within the next 12 months. And globally, employees are disengaged worldwide. But in terms of measuring the culture, engagement is one tool. Another tool, of course, is not so much revenue, but is the profitability there, meaning that we're being efficient and optimizing our systems internally. But the lever that I look at is just asking either the team leader or the business owner or the executive team or the group of learning and development professionals, what's the goal we have here? And what would be a meaningful way of measuring that to know that we're on the right track? And for me, it's come down to 4 buckets. What systems are enabling that ideal outcome? What behaviours force people to, or influence people to behave a certain way? What communication connects all the dots so that's normal and expected? And what relationships are influencing how people behave, defined as who they want to impress, which influences how they then behave, which influences results.
Yeah, okay, that's really good, because I like how you've actually taken a slightly different approach, and I would argue a more holistic approach to getting that measure, because yeah, I know that there are engagement surveys and people say that it's a measure of culture. But if I was to ask most people in their organisation, what's the company culture? Or how would you describe the company culture? You're likely to end up with, you know, dozens of different responses depending on the team that they work in, the length of time that they've been in the company, their ability to articulate that. Some of it's felt, some of it's overt, some of it's deliberate, some of it's not deliberate. So, yeah, I appreciate that you've got, you know, those different buckets to try to look at the impact of the culture on behaviour, because it absolutely does. Whether we measure it or whether we don't, it's having an impact, right?
It's spot on.
Yeah. So can you talk to us a little bit, because a lot of the businesses that are listening to this, some have leaders who listen to this podcast who come from big enterprise, you know, like a Google, not quite a Google size, but an AMP size for sure. And then there are lots of businesses that are, you know, one-man bands, you know, sole traders. And then we've got, you know, the small businesses that are from 5 mil, you know, right through to 50, 100 that are listening to this as well. So for those businesses that don't necessarily think about culture in any kind of deliberate way, how is a culture shaped and who shapes that culture?
Yeah. You know, the misconception is that it's one person's job to do culture.
HR.
Yeah, HR. And if you're a solo operator or a small team, the boss, the founder, and there's no doubt about it, leaders set the tone. but how everyone behaves influences the culture. So using an example, just starting with a one-person band or a small company, I'd be an example of a small company at Happiness Concierge. You're wanting to extract your secret sauce, and your secret sauce is what are the sort of values and belief and the non-negotiable experiences you want your customers to have, or your end users, or your community, those you serve,
Yes.
and what systems, behaviours, communication, relationships make that inevitable.
Yes.
Now, if it's looking back a few years for me and starting a team and growing a team, I wrote down everything I did that was sort of non-negotiable in the sort of concierge angle of service.
Yep.
And I wrote it down and I gave people this, 35-page workbook of, what we're expected around here. And to my surprise and disappointment, most people didn't read it all. But to my delight, people would replay some of these sentences like, audience first, fail privately to succeed publicly. Yes, and, say yes and then figure out the solution afterwards. It was a few years ago. And so if you are a one person or small org, you'd want to write down your non-negotiables, your value system, but more so than, in addition to values, what behaviours are absolutely non-negotiable? What behaviours are fine? What can't you walk past? Now, for a medium and large enterprise, it's totally different. So for a medium enterprise, 5 to 50 million, 5 to 25 to 50 employees, you are wanting to empower a pretty small executive team. And by small, I just simply mean about 2 to 5 people potentially. Mm-hmm. And you've got 5 different leadership styles. They are, though, loyal to the founder or the CEO. So what can end up happening is they look to the CEO to set that culture. What you're wanting to do is what I do with teams like that is a team agreement where you're explicit on the SBCR, systems, behaviours, communication, relationships, explicit on that. You're creating your secret sauce, and you then create a team agreement, which is when a team member comes to me and says this, what's our similar version of the same thing? And they can take more effort than you might think. So it's easy enough to create a team agreement, but sticking to it, that's the stuff I can work with companies for years. But in a larger org, you'll have different team cultures in every single team, depending on the leader. And we can do team agreements, but you might have 7 different team agreements. But you if you have a goal you want to achieve, you're wanting to figure out what's the similarities in all of these teams that make the culture inevitable.
So that's the bit that really, really excites me about what you say. When you talk about the behaviours that make that culture inevitable or make that outcome inevitable, I absolutely love that. And talking about the things that you can't walk past, because that's absolutely part of how really great people can become disenfranchised when they see behaviour that their leaders are walking past, and they're upholding the culture, they're upholding those agreements, and other people aren't necessarily. You talked then a little bit about, lots of different teams having lots of different team agreements. I have a couple of questions around that, because my experience in working with some of these businesses has been that, some teams tend to have cultures of their own, which you were kind of alluded to. How can leaders work more collaboratively to align their individual team cultures to the one that the company is trying to cultivate?
Yeah. So the wonderful thing about having a much larger team is that you have different perspectives. And of course, you're wanting to empower people to share those perspectives. What can be missing in some of those workplace cultures is what's our non-negotiable, what's the sort of the company party line or the hard line, so to speak. Yeah. And there can be a hesitancy from many leaders who sincerely want to empower their team and engage their team. They can be indirect with their expectations. So when there are different cultures and different teams, let's use an example. You say you've got a large for-profit company, you've got a marketing team, the sales team, the HR team, the finance, the ops team, and all these leaders are theoretically on the same page. They're coming to the meetings. They're saying, the leadership executive meetings, saying, we're all here to collaborate and work together. And of course you say that in front of the CEO, and then they go back to their own planet and do whatever they want.
Right.
Right? So the fix there is not to magically make 7 cultures talk to each other, so to speak. The fix there is a maturity with the leadership capability. What stops us from having those tough conversations and disagreeing in public with you? So as an example, Google in 2016 did this epic study called Project Aristotle, and they surveyed 180 high and low performing teams. And what they discovered from all the teams they surveyed was those who performed the highest had an element of psychological safety, which is defined as the absence of interpersonal fear. Behind that was trust and clarity, meaning, role scope, knowing what I'm responsible and for, and of course impact. But when we talk about an absence of an absence of interpersonal fear, we're talking about, I can say to you, Ingrid, I don't understand why I have to do things your way, and I don't want to, but I need to learn to for this team to be effective. And that will influence me going back to my marketing team. Oh, well, we have to do it Ingrid's way, because you know what Ingrid's like. Well, you also have to do it Rachel's way, back to your sales team, because you know what Rachel's like. And that completely undermines both of our authority in that context.
Yeah, yep. So, okay, the ability to have those tough conversations, but, God, I mean, you know, anyone who's listening goes, oh, you know, I've been at those meetings where everyone says the right thing and then goes away and does whatever they want. I love how you said they go back to their own planets and then do whatever they want. But is there a way of helping those leaders to not only have those tough conversations, but to drive a particular culture that's congruent with the overarching company culture? Is that possible?
Yeah. So in an example, I work with a org with 30 people in the leadership and executive team, so pretty big. And they had gone through a huge change, merger, and they were wanting to use it as an opportunity to say, well, what is our new culture? We wanted to honour the historical knowledge, but also not that there was a sense of suspicion necessarily that I knew about, but there was a sense of a big change. My job could be on the line. You know, this is my corner of the zoo. This is mine. And so what we talked about is the mission of the org was super clear. What systems, behaviours, communication, relationships make that inevitable in every context. And they're sitting in their own, in this conference room, they're sitting in their own circle of tables with complimentary mints in their own teams going, look, yeah, nodding along. But what makes that inevitable in every team? And then I asked them to come and present their SBCR, systems, behaviours, communication, relationships. And they would present, and then we'd have to circle on the whiteboard, where are these systems incongruent and what's the impact? Now that's hardcore work, but to people listening, it is hardcore, but it's worth it, because the output of that is people realize, oh, this stuff needs to talk to each other to have a congruent culture. I don't need to pretend to like a certain leadership style if I'm not like that. I can be who I am authentically. I can be direct or whatever. But the party line we need to honour the system with technology or operations because it impacts our customer experience. I know how the dots connect, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful process that you've just given us, you know, the outline of how you actually facilitate teams across that, so that when there is a disconnect, you know, they not only have they identified that, you've also said that, you know, they have the opportunity after that each of those teams is presented, you know, their non-negotiables, to be able to identify where there's incongruence, and then you help them to navigate that incongruence so that they're a lot more unified in their culture. What are the impacts, though, when people don't work with someone as wonderful as you and there is just that disconnect across, you know, various teams? And what I mean by that is not just a disconnecting culture with each other, but also a disconnecting culture from what the company in its entirety is trying to do.
Yeah. And I just want to say to anyone listening, that's way more common than you think, you know.
Yeah.
It's way more common. So behind the dysfunction or the incongruence or the misalignment is usually one of 3 themes. And because what happens is I go on these offsites and then people get drunk and they tell me everything. And usually the themes are, I know, usually the summary of those enlightening late night conversations are, someone has not been happy for a long time, yet they haven't yet taken the step to go, oh my gosh, I'm unhappy. I am employable, but I've probably been a bit since I've dusted off my CV. I'm a senior exec. It's time for me to make that step. And they've gone too long, so they've become sort of sunken in the sand. And that could see some pretty bad behaviour. The other one is when there's a dislike of the CEO because there's not that psychological safety. So the CEO will see it, be like, yeah, because I had the one-on-ones with the CEO and give the briefing. I'm empowering them. I'm telling them my expectations, but because inherently work is a structure, you want to impress your boss, you want to have hits on the board. You just don't say, listen, Ingrid, I am really struggling with this pipeline. I don't know what to do. And CEOs will say, well, they'll say to me, at their level, they should know what to do. So go and fix that. We'll pay you to train them, and I do and can and whatnot. But the role is for the CEO to step into a teaching role. This is what I need from you. This is what I need your leadership capability to be uplifted, to use all the corporate jargon. And so the first theme is I'm unhappy in my job. I haven't admitted it to anyone. You're an external. I've had a few drinks, I'll let you know. The second one is I can't be open with the CEO. And then the third one is, well, actually, I've been here X amount of years. And this is how we've always done it, Rach. And I'm going to politely nod along in your lovely facilitated session with complimentary Kit Kats and mints. But privately, there's no planet where I'm aligning with this. And that behaviour is, all those behaviours are pretty unhelpful, but altogether they make a wonderful blend of a disconnected culture. What we're talking about though, yes, culture is a big word. We're talking about individual challenges which can be solved with a direct conversation.
Yeah. It all comes back to that, doesn't it? And it all comes back to leaders, and in this case you're talking about the CEO being able to coach, their leaders through some of that, that disconnect. And I sometimes can't blame that older employee in a sense. I mean, they're a tricky character to kind of navigate when they have been there a long time and they have the history of people coming and going and things that sound fantastic and everyone gets their hopes up about and goes, yes, now it's going to be different. Yeah. And then, it doesn't get traction. And as soon as the workshop's over or the program's finished or, someone leaves, it gets, it's not something that's lasting. But what you're talking about here are some ways in which you can make this stick. And I think that's really what can make all the difference.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to training, I have this tiny part of what I do is one-on-one coaching, and I don't really advertise it, but those drunk conversations lead to, well, let's do something about this, Yeah. And in those conversations is somebody who hasn't had a dialogue with themselves about what they want, and there's no way they're going to do that with their boss, and it might not be appropriate to. But I think the best thing a CEO can do at any size business, 1 to 5, medium or large, is if you build a foundation of trust with your direct reports, let's say you got 5 or 12 or 30, if you have a relationship of honesty where you personally accept that they might leave and accept they might not want to be there and say to yourself, I'll just recruit someone else. You want someone who wants to be there, and to do that requires you to be frank, to say, hey, I want you to want to be here, but if you don't want to be here, that's a decision you've got to make on your own. But I need 2 people. What's the saying? I need both of your feet on the bus. I need all of you here. I said to a group of leaders recently, the thing about leadership is that you have to take total ownership and be the bigger person. If you want that, let's go. If not, get out now. It's a waste of both of our time. You can see them going, oh my gosh. Yeah. But I had to catch up with them recently and they're all 2 feet in. Let's go, Joe. Let's go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. In the book, The Sales Revolution, I talk about a culture of customer where everyone approaches their role from the perspective of delivering measurable value to those that they serve, whether that be an internal customer or an external customer. we've kind of danced around this explicitly so far, but what impact does culture have on performance? You know, let's look at good culture and its impact on performance, and also poor culture on performance.
Yeah. There's some great case studies out there. One that comes to mind is this study they did with 95 car dealerships.
Yeah.
It's a bit older, but it's bloody good. Anyway, and they invested heavily in their culture, particularly in their sales team. And they found that the runway from inputting into the culture, investing into people, having hard conversations, focusing on engagement, led to a 2-year customer satisfaction, which led to a 4-year higher profitability. But the inverse was not true. By focusing on solely revenue, it eroded culture. So it's not to say it's a binary, but the input to higher revenue or performance or engagement, if that's your goal as an organization, is culture. It's not the other way around. That's what I learned.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's been a few of those sorts of studies done, and, you know, there's a number of examples. I think, you know, Boeing was one of those examples a couple of years ago where, you know, they really changed the focus of the business around profit, and where profit becomes the target, it makes sense that leaders are going to try to find fast tracks to profit, which erodes a lot of other really strong behaviours that, you know, produce other great byproducts and direct outcomes, by the way. Whereas when people show up in a different way, when they show up to serve others, when they have more of a mindset of delivering value, which you know underpins where I'm coming from anyway, you do find that it drives better revenue, it drives better company culture, it drives better margins, it drives better profit. You know, when you've got across a business of people who are all really set up to understand their role in affecting the company's outcomes, because it's measurable, because it's actually real, it's not something that's fluffy, and I don't have to be in sales to have that impact, then, you know, people then start to have more direct meaning to their contribution to all of those things. So, yeah, I mean, Boeing's one. I mean, then there's been, you know, some of those, you know, disasters around, you know, some of the environmental stuff, which again is, you know, what you're talking about is when you just focus on one metric, which is a financial metric, the other things get eroded. But when you kind of focus over here on culture, you also get that, and you get all of the other benefits as well.
It's a good combo package, isn't it?
Yeah.
I so agree with you, both from a quantifiable perspective and having experienced it in the field. What some people think is, well, if we're not direct about needing to increase profitability, what are we in business for? And that's true if you're in a for-profit business. That's the reason for being in business. All we're offering is the duty of care, not only to people, but also to the customer. And if every team member, regardless of whether in the sales team or in the accounting team or front of house team, knows who are they serving and what do they want that customer to experience. Now, that customer might be your head of marketing, that customer might be internal, external. It might be, for me, it's often the front of house reception team before I get into the training. They're the ones coming in being like, she was great or she was rude, whatever it might be. And they're also the ones who give you feedback on how your training landed during the lunch break. It's lovely. But asking yourself, and I asked the team this recently, who are your most important customers or stakeholders, if you want to use that word, and what is their experience of you in a high-stress context? And they went, and they wrote down 3 people. And then I asked, because this was more of a junior group, how would you like to be perceived, and what actions do you need to do to match that perception? And particularly in an Australian context, it's very individualistic. What's in it for me, 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 me? And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. All we're saying is when you put the customer at the center of all decisions, that customer might be your boss, work becomes so much easier, and it has a direct link to profitability too.
That's really interesting. You know, I love that you said that, you know, in a high stress context, and, you know, what would you, you know, like asking people what they think that their current perception is and how they would like to be perceived. Do you find that people often know what they need to do differently, or are they kind of like, gosh, actually, yeah, I know I need to change, but what does that look like?
Yeah, it's the former, which is, oh, how do I want to be? Oh, people can see me? Very rarely will I have someone going, yep, I've been needing to work on that. And I think because training can represent, because change is revolting for all of us, myself included, and I teach this stuff. But also, very rarely do we pull over from the motorway and go, right, what's my game plan? And often we can, because I hear from people in my coaching sessions, I'm not where I want to be, or I'm passed over for a promotion. It's a mystery to me. And often the exercise we keep coming back to is, what's your career goal, if you have one? How would you like to be perceived? We're not focusing on how you are perceived, because you believe you're being perceived as you wish. It's just a mystery why these goals aren't coming to fruition. How would you like to be perceived, and what actions are in congruence with that? So as one example, in a study of 87,000 leaders, it was found that those who had the greater influence had, in this order, a foundation of a positive relationship. I believe Ingrid wants what's best for me. I trust what Ingrid says. Ingrid gives me feedback. I trust they're legit. Sound judgment and expertise, not subject matter expertise necessarily, although that was included, but I made the right call. I gave that person feedback. I got rid of the bad apple. I did the hard thing. And the third piece was consistency. You know, another study has found that people would rather a average boss all the time than one that's fabulous or in a terrible mood next. Yes. And so we use that framing for your influence. What do you want to work on? Is it this positive relationship piece? And if you're low influence, how do you know? Oh, well, people don't do you any favors and they don't return your calls. If you're high influence, they're happy to help you out. Where are you? Ooh, I'm probably 5 out of 10 influence. Nice. What can we do to change that? I think what I and the company does well is makes your goals about how you want to succeed in life a reality. Well, you know, This is easy. You can just behave differently. Well, that's hard. Well, it is hard, but it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very tangible. I mean, it's, you know, making it very actionable enables people to start to see progress, you know, even if it's just incremental change through behaving in a different way and understanding the impact that has on, you know, the environment, the context and people around them, is incredibly motivating. And they've just got to get a taste of that initial change before they get addicted to that new behaviour.
Exactly. You know, there's a saying that your nervous system needs to experience it before you can convince it to do something scary again. So with a small group of leaders I'm working with in finance at the moment, they were given homework and they thought about how they want to be perceived. And their homework is to go and source a piece of feedback from someone who will influence their career, internal or external. And they came back and they were like, whew, all right, we're going to do that. But the lens we talked about was, in what context are you experiencing me, and when I'm stressed, what does that look like? And one leader said, you know, I realized from this exercise, Rach, it's actually really simple. I just need to do a slightly different email more regularly. Or another person said, oh, I've been doing these updates every Friday. They love it. You know, they know what I'm working on. So we're not talking about life-changing changes, although that can be an output. We're just talking about tiny remindings, and the reminder is, what's in it for me? Oh, I want to be perceived differently. Oh, that's the leverage. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I think I said to you in the early emails, you know, your name, Rachel Service, and you're the Happiness Concierge. I mean, I just love. There's got to be a numerological reason for that, surely. somewhere. But listen, Rachel, thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate that. We'll make sure in the show notes that people can reach out to you at your website. Is there any other way that they can reach out to you?
Yeah, the website's great, happinessconcierge.com, as is LinkedIn. I'm on there fairly often. And every Tuesday I write a very straight-to-the-point newsletter about how to increase your influence and impact at work. And you can sign up at my website too.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for being my guest today, Rachel.
Thank you.
Okay, you've been listening to The Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard. And to find out how The Sales Doctor can help your organisation to transform its revenue, growth and profit, please email me at ingrid@thesalesdoctor.com.au. Visit us on our website at www.thesalesdoctor.com.au. I look forward to your company next episode. Bye for now.